Today we're building, setting up, and configuring the Pavo25. Now this is a really good option if you're trying to save some money, or if you let me have a lot of parts laying around, this is a really good option. Now I've done a full review on the Pavo25 kit, talking about some of the design advantages and what's actually included in the box. I'll leave that video linked above and below so you can take a look at it. Now having said that, let's talk about some of the components used for today's build. Starting from my left, I have the flight controller here. This is the F405 flight controller, all-in-one with a 20 amp ESC. This is the recommended flight controller used for this build, and this is the one that you will get if you did order this as a bind and fly. Now included in here, you also have a XT30 pigtail, which is adequate with a capacitor built into it, so that's really good. And we'll talk about this flight controller a little bit later as we install it. Now below that we have our motors. These are the 1404 4500 kV motors. These are also the motors recommended by Beta FPV. Nothing special here. It has a lower kV here, so really good for efficiency, and we'll see how it behaves once we start flying it. Now connected to the motors we have our propellers here. These are your Gemfan D63 propellers. These are 2.5-inch propellers, which is why this is called a Pavo25. We'll see how these things perform. Hopefully it's relatively quiet, and then we'll have some pretty good flight times with this. Now this leads us to the most subjective part of this build, and that's whether to go analog or digital with this build. Now I left a poll in my communities tab, and most of you guys suggested that I go with a digital build. Now this drone is offered by Beta FPV in a digital form from the factory in bind and fly with the Caddx Vista and the Nebula Pro Nano camera. So because that was offered, I decided to go a little bit different route and go with HDZero. Now HDZero is an up and coming system. They've done a pretty good job advertising and making this very good, but this is a very smooth, seamless system, you know, featuring in low latency and just nice, smooth image. So I decided to go with this. This should be adequate for this build. This is a whooped VTX, and this is power adjustable from 25 to 200 milliwatts. And because this is also a whooped VTX, the mounting pattern should be seamless for this build right here. It does have a 25.5 by 25.5 mounting solution. Now, as far as cameras for the VTX, this whoop only accepts 14mm cameras, so nano cameras. So if you have any micro cameras, which are 90mm, they're not gonna fit into this whoop. So having said that, I did go with the Runcam Nano HDZero camera. This should be a perfect complement for my VTX and fit perfectly in this whoop. Now to connect my camera to my VTX, I have a MIPI cable in here. This is necessary, and this doesn't come with your camera or VTX, so make sure you pick this up. I also have my antenna here for my VTX. This is a Xylo VTX, but any 5.8 gigahertz antenna should work, and I might change this in the future, but for right now, this should be adequate. Now as far as radio length, this is gonna be a cinematic beast, so you do wanna have some decent penetration. So in that case, I am gonna go with Express ELRS. I am gonna go with the EP1 Express ELRS receiver. This should be pretty cool. And it does have the external antenna on here, so it can have some really good range and decent penetration. I've done multiple reviews on Express ELRS on how to install them. I'll leave those videos linked above so you can take a look at it. So these are all the parts and components we'll be using for today's build. If you need any one of these or you want more information on these specific parts, I'll leave them linked down below so you can take a look at it. Now this might be a little bit longer video than normal, so I've created chapters to help you navigate this video and find the areas that you're most interested in. If you think that's a pretty cool idea, hit that like button so other pilots know that this is a video worth watching. So with that out of the way, let's head over to the bench and get this build started. Okay, so at the bench here, we have all our parts on the bench, and they're all spread out for a reason. The first reason is we can see all our parts line of sight, so we can see if we're missing a part for the build. And if we're at the end of our build and we have any required parts, then we know we have to include that before we actually seal and tidy this up. The second thing is for motivation. You can see your progression as you see less and less parts available. We know we're getting closer and closer to the completion of this build. So it's twofold. All right, so the first thing I want to do is just mock up, do a light mock up, make sure everything fits on here. And we're not going to do a complete build on here, but the main thing here is the stack. I want to make sure the stack fits in here, so by the time I put it in here, that there's no snags, there's no shortage of wires. The last thing I want to do is just hardwire everything here, snip the wires, and then it can't fit or it can't reach the flight controllers. I'm going to start off first with the flight controller, which I have right here. Now there are some gummies included with your kit, and you have some smalls right here. I'm going to use one that came with the frame. It's a little bit thicker. Now there's multiple ways to install this. I'm just going to put 2 in here for now because I do have to do some soldering. So obviously you want to have the taller part at the bottom. All right, we got one in. All right, oh, it's so bad. Now there's a few bolts that come with it. Obviously you want to use the longest one that came with here. Now these bolts here can be used with this adapter plate. I'm going to use the longer one Put your bolts through here. Put your rubber grommet through here. Same for the top one. All right. So we have our flight controller in here, and what I'm trying to see is just see if there's any clearance issues, if anything is touching. And as you can see, there's adequate clearance on here. So nothing is really touching. That's good. So the next thing I want to do is check out this VTX and see if the VTX is gonna also clear. And I can already see it that it probably is not gonna clear. Now this is the Whoop VTX. The cool thing about this Whoop VTX is the mounting pattern. I do not have to use this adapter plate. Everything that I have here so far is gonna match up with these mounting holes, so that's great. Now, there's no real orientation for the Whoop, the VTX. So try your best to put it in a position that is gonna be most convenient for you. And as you can see, it's touching, so that's not gonna work. Now, the Whoop VTX is kind of interesting. You can't put a rubber grommet in these holes. It's just too small of a hole. So you just have to put a grommet below it and on top it. So I'll use the thickest one that I have and make some space between the flight controller and the VTX so that nothing is touching. We can have some better cooling. All right, now we have a stack here. Looks good. Nothing is touching. Right, there's stack. It has clearance, proper cooling. And let's see if that fits in the frame here. Looks pretty good. No problems here. I could put a bolt in there if I wanted to. All right, flip it over. And there you go, guys. You have all this space here. Take a look at this. Looks good, looks good. And if you did this correctly with the flight controller, you can see that well, it's really hard to see. You have a slot right here, so you can put your 90-degree micro USB cord right here and get access to the flight controller for beta flight and for updates. Man, there's a lot of space in here. So if you have a Vista or a taller VTX, it will still fit in here. Let's remove this one bolt that's holding it. And our mock-up is complete. It was successful. Look at that. So there's my stack. That's half the battle. We're gonna put the motors here and then just wire the motors to the flight controller. That's our next step. So let's remove all these. Now, the main thing here, this is a really good flight controller by Beta FPV. I think this is the 4th version, version 4. Let's take a look. I think there's a marking on here that says it. Now, it's really cool. They've made changes to these things every so often, every time they came with a new one. And I like this. A lot of the manufacturers are going with this right now where they have the plugs already on here, and that's really good. Now, if you're a traditionalist, you want to solder your receiver, your VTX to the board, you can still do that. But with this is really convenient, guys. They've already soldered this connector right here to the board. This is for your VTX. And then you have another one here for your receiver. So it comes with the included harness right here. 2 harnesses, one for the VTX, one for the receiver. And now you just connect these things, these 2 harnesses to your VTX and receiver respectively, and then just plug it in. It's really convenient, guys. It reduces the workload and lowers the mistakes. Now, I still have to do some soldering here for numerous reasons. One, I have to solder the power lead to the actual flight controller board, but more importantly, I have to install these motors. Traditionally, you would solder it to the board. These come with a harness already on here, so that's the option I'm gonna use. It's up to you if you wanna solder it on. I would assume that soldering on this board would be easier than attaching these 90-degree plugs. But for repairability in the future to repair this, having the plugs might be more convenient, but initially it might be more hassle. But I am gonna do it that way with the plugs, or at least attempt it. And here's my first big task, is to solder these connectors to the flight controller. All right, so let's make some space here. I'm gonna get my extra pair of hands. It's gonna be hard for you guys to see this, but it's okay. I'll just tack the first one first and move along. So I'm gonna put some flux on this first, make sure the surface is clean. There we go. That's one. Not bad. All right.
2 hours later.
Okay, so we have all our motor connections soldered to the flight controller. Next thing I want to do is wire up my LED harness. Now the Pavo25 does have a built-in LED. It's just 3 wires, and this should be one of the last things we have to solder up to this flight controller. Now these pads are very, very, very tight, very, very close, and it's actually close to the ones I just soldered with the motor wire here. So it's gonna be a tight fit. The wires are already pre-tinned, so it should be as simple as just lining it up. So let's get this out the way. Yellow first. All right, it took it. 5 volts. Steady, Thomas, steady. Whew. Dang. That looks good. Let's put our last harness, which is gonna be these power cables. It's gonna be a big one. This one might get hot, so we're just gonna do this. That's good enough. All right, so I almost just played myself here. Almost just played myself. That's the thing, this thing is so short. They want you to solder this through here. Right. All right, can I mount this thing now? Look how tight this thing is. That's what I was afraid of. I might have to undo it. So they want you to put the harness through this little hole right here, and then the battery lead comes up to the top. That looks good, right? It's just too short for this application. It has to go in these holes right here. And look at that. That's not gonna reach. I'm pulling on this. All right, so we have the extension here added now to my power lead. It's going to the flight controller. The length is good now. Now I can actually install my flight controller to the actual frame. All right, so that's all finished. The flight controller here is pretty much done. Let's install or reinstall these grommets. All right, so now we need our long screws or bolts. It's as easy as just putting these 4 screws in here. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they're recessed, so that's pretty interesting. Now you have to understand, once you add your TPU here for your battery, it's going to cover these 2 screws, so you have to put these bolts in first. Crucial thing here is make sure the arrow for the flight control is facing forward. All right, so we have all 4 in there. Flight controller is in, guys. All right, so the next thing here is the VTX, obviously, and we can install the VTX if we want to. We're not going to install it yet, only because we need to wire up the harness. And as we talked about earlier, this flight controller has the harness or a plug here for the VTX. So here it is, and we're gonna do everything outside of the drone. That's the cool thing about harnesses. You can just wire this up straight to your VTX or your receiver, and then afterwards just plug everything in, just like the motors. This is a better view of said harness, and you can see here battery, ground, TX, and RX. So we're gonna use these 4. So I need to know that when wiring this up. Now there are some words or letters on the VTX, and from left to right we have ground, voltage, RX, and TX. So just 4 wires. The yellow is TX, and just like any other accessory that goes to a UART pad, the TX goes to an RX and the RX goes to the TX on the flight controller. Let's do it. Perfect. All right, and then the last one is black, which is ground. Perfect. Yeah, that looks really nice. Next thing I want to do is just get the receiver as well, since we have this other harness on here. All right, so this is my Express ELRS receiver. Now I've done multiple videos on how to wire up Express ELRS for your drone. This is just one of multiple receivers you can put into your drone. So I'll leave the video linked above and below so you can know how to wire this up, but it's simple as 4 wires, just like the VTX, ground, voltage, RX, and TX. So now I have to figure out which one is RX, which one is TX, and go from there. Here we go. The white one should be next. Perfect. we go. And then ground. It's really better. And bada bing, bada boom. We got 2 devices ready to go. We just have to plug them in. That was the extent of all the electrical wiring for this build. All right, look at this, guys. This is amazing. Everything is good to go now. I want to test fit this VTX again, just to see if it's touching anything like these wires or any of these cables here or plugs for the motors. Flight control is in place. VTX is kind of in place. Not bad. Okay, so we have all our accessories for the flight controller already soldered on. We have our receiver here, and we have our VTX already soldered. All we have to do now is just plug these into the flight controller, and these accessories should work. Okay, so before I move on to secure this to the actual frame, I need to do 2 things. The first thing is I need to solder a pad on the flight controller, and that's because of my specific receiver here. I'll leave an image on the screen showing you what you need to do in case you're using a Crossfire / Express ELRS receiver, or if you're gonna use the receiver built into your air unit. It's just 2 pads that you have to bridge, and that's required on this flight controller. The second thing I need to do is update the firmware on this VTX. So this comes factory with some version of the HDZero firmware on here. I just don't know which one it is, but it needs to be the same as your VRX or as your goggles. Today we'll be using my Fat Shark Scout HDs, and that will be doing the update on this. So let's just bridge the pad on this flight controller first. I think that worked. Next thing I'm gonna do here is just update the firmware on my VTX. This thing will be powered up, so I wanna make sure I have an antenna on this. So let's break out our antenna. So there's that, and then I don't know if this is required or not, but I do wanna attach the camera to the front. And that's gonna require you using the MIPI cable. And the only reason that I am updating the firmware right now is because once I install this into the frame, I won't have access to the plug. So we're just gonna do it here while it's open. So we're good. I'm just gonna plug my update cable into, they're both the same, no difference here, into this port here. And as I said before, guys, these things are very delicate, so just be careful when you insert this in here. And all you have to do is put this other end into your VRX. In my case, I'm using the Scout HD. This has a VRX built into it. And there's a firmware update port right here. That's what I'll use. Plug this in as well. So all I have to do now is just power this up. I have the firmware on my SD card. I'll leave a link where you can find that. You just go to the HDZero website, download the latest firmware, choose the right VTX, and then put that to the root folder of your SD card. And then put the SD card into your VRX, in my case, the goggles, and then just power this up. So let's get the power cable. All right, let's power it up and see if this thing here actually updates. All right, right HDZero TX. So it's writing already, it's doing its job. Doing a really good job. And as you can see, my VTX is powered as well. Right, done. Firmware update successfully. Repower VRX now. So I can just plug this. And we should be good. Perfect. That's all done. We can finally mount the VRX to the frame and then just bolt it down. That looks good. All right, this looks good. Let's see if we can tighten them down. All right, there's your flight controller. Motor time. All right, so here's our motors here. 4 motors. These are the 1404s. We talked about those before. All right, straightforward, boom. Can't believe we're installing the motors already. I definitely want to see how close they get to the windings. All right, it doesn't get that close. We're looking pretty good. All right, that's one motor. I just want to install them and then worry about the plugs later. I don't know. if that's smart, if that's wise. All right, we have the motors all connected. Looks almost like a drone. As you can see, this is shaping up to be a really nice, clean build, only because everything is mounted to the top plate of this frame here. So let's plug these motors in. Should be fairly simple. I like to use that word, should be. All right. Perfect. There you go, looking like a drone. This wire here goes to the LED. I should twist it as well. All right, two things we just gotta do is I'm gonna plug this wire in here. This is from the VTX to the flight controller. And this is gonna be one of the last times I have access to it. Oh man, perfect. All right, we're almost done here. Let's just attach this camera mount, and we have to attach the camera to it. So our micro camera, I wanna make sure it's right side up. It doesn't really matter here. HDZero, slide this in here. Now, as I said before earlier in my other video, this thing only accepts nano cameras. So if you have a micro camera, it's not gonna fit. So 14 millimeters. Wow, first try, it went all the way through. Perfect. Wow, it went through as well. Great success. All right, so we have the camera mounted to the frame. We have the MIPI cable attached on here, so it looks pretty good. The only thing that we're missing right now is just the receiver and then the LED. Let's get that mounted, situated. Now this is the TPU for the back here, the aft, and we'll install that in a second. Two LEDs, it doesn't matter, just in there. All right. Okay, all right, it worked. Here's my antenna for my receiver. It's delicate. Wow, really delicate. All right, perfect. All right, that looks good. Okay, so we have our camera mounted to the frame. We have the camera on here, looks pretty good, and it's all tightened up. We have our MIPI cable going straight to our VTX and it's connected, looks pretty good. And we have our VTX connected to our flight control via the plug here. So everything looks pretty good. Really, really good. We have our motors on here and yeah, we're ready to assemble this to the actual bottom frame. Now I have my receiver in here as well, looking really good. And we have our LED in here. So as you can see, Beta FPV is very proud of this. If you do have to service this drone, it's literally just 6 screws that's holding this together. And you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you just remove this and everything is mounted to the top plate. So that's a really cool design if you have to service this, or if you do damage the ducts on here, you can just order one of these and then just replace everything on top here. The only thing that's attaching the top plate to this bottom right here is the receiver antenna and then your LED harness. I'm just gonna plug my receiver into the flight controller. All right, perfect. Our receiver is now connected. And then the next thing I wanna do is just plug the LED to this. So that's the only thing that's gonna attach to the bottom part of this frame here. That's in there. That's it. So let's mount my receiver in place. All right. Looks good. All right. All right, let's get 1 or 2 of these hooked up. Amazing. Can't believe we're at this point where we're just wrapping this thing up and just securing it. All right, look at that thing. Wow, that looks good. Man, this looks good already. Look at this. See that? Nothing sticking out. Very clean. I guess we can put the battery strap on here. And this should be facing forward. And as you can see, it's gonna cover these two. So make sure, yeah, you don't need access to that anymore. We'll see if I need access to it in the future. Perfect. Let's do the same for the other side. That should be in the front, like this. Wow, that's secure. Take a look at that. Wow, we got our antenna here. HDZero Express ELRS and a 2.5-inch whoop. All right. Last but not least is just installing the props. So we have the props right here. I have my 4 props, and this is gonna be a pusher configuration. So in my case, this is gonna be a prop out configuration here. So this way, and then this way on the outside. So let's just put these props on here and make sure I have the right direction. This looks correct. All right. Let's see if I can get these screws in here. It's gonna be a pain in the butt. All right, so we have our final 2 bolts in there. All right, here we go. It's done. There it is, guys. There's the final setup. This thing looks beautiful. All right, enough of this looking at this thing. Let's see if this thing works. I should be able to plug this in Betaflight and get this thing set up, but that's still electricity. There's a lot of stuff that we did today. We actually built this ourselves. So we are gonna take it step by step and use a smoke stopper. All right, ready to go. I don't think I wanna arm it. Actually, it won't even arm. It's not configured yet in Betaflight, so.
Welcome to OpenTX.
So let's plug this in. Guys, this is a big deal right here. All right, did I forget anything? Let's try it out. All right, it powered up. I don't have the receiver in here, so I don't know if the receiver is getting power or if it's going into bootloader or not. All right, so let's see here. I need to take a second look at this diagram, because based upon what I just saw there, that is RX and TX is crossed. All right, that was a quick enough swap. All right, let's try it. It's flashing. And we have signal. All right, just swap one wire, that was it. Okay, so this thing here is finally done. This thing looks the business, it looks the part, clean build, everything looks good. We just powered it up, no smoke, which is good as well. So the last thing we're gonna do here is just install the bumpers for this. It looks pretty good as it is right now, but to have some added protection, you might wanna add the bumpers. I have them right here. This is more of a cosmetic kind of design or style. And these things just stick to the side right here. So should be a pretty straightforward, simple install. All right, let's do it. That wasn't terrible. All right, this one looks a little bit better. Not too shabby at all. Take a look at that, guys. Woo, here we go. All right, this drone here, as far as assembly, is complete. Just need to configure this thing. Make sure the Betaflight is good. Make sure we have OSD on our HDZero screen, and that's it. So, all right, guys, before I do that, I'm curious, since this build is already done, this is a complete build, I wanna see how much this thing weighs. 138 grams. Not bad, that's pretty good. That's really light, guys. Now, the advertised weight for this bind and fly is 140 grams for the analog, and I think like 160 something for the digital. So this is a pretty complete drone. This is 100% complete, and we have digital on here. So the best of both worlds, Express ELRS, HDZero, and it's coming in 2 grams lighter than the advertised weight. So that's amazing. So we're coming in under what's advertised. So we're lighter and we potentially have a better drone, guys. So I'm eager to see how this thing is gonna fly with HDZero and then this lightweight. Let's head to the computer, configure this thing, and then take it for a flight. All right, so we have the computer. We have our Pavo25. We just built this. Looks really good, nice and neat, tidy. I have my 90-degree micro USB port right here so I can get access to the flight controller. All right, so we have Betaflight right here. All right, and let's connect. accelerometer is enabled but not calibrated. All right, so we are using new parts in here, so this flight controller is new, so it does make sense why we have this warning on here. If you're using spare parts, you might not need to calibrate it, but I do recommend you do recalibrate the flight controller once it's in this frame here. Close, and as you can see, it shows that it's upside down, which makes sense because this might be an inverted setup than a traditional setup here. So calibrate accelerometer, it's gonna flip around, and there we go. That's pretty cool. Next thing I want to do is just put my configuration on the flight controller. Now, you can go to the Beta FPV website and get that. I do have that right here. All I have to do now is just copy and paste the whole thing. I already have it copied. Paste this in here. Hit enter. It's taken everything here, by the way. And it saved it, which is pretty cool. And as you can see, UART4, which is MSP, that's good. That's what we have our VTX on. And then UART3 is serial RX for our receiver. So that's set up pretty good. Looking down here, we have the craft name. That's all inserted in there. LED strip is on. I think we're good. Now, the VTX may or may not be powered. So let's just plug this in. All right, we have an image actually. I don't see any OSD elements. That's kind of normal. This drone isn't set up for HDZero, so we do want to set that up. Now there's a couple ways to do it. We're going to do it the old-fashioned way, and this is the way you're going to do it if you're using the old configurator. I'm using the most recent one. I'm using the configurator 10.8.0. This is the newest one. So two things to do here. Now we're using UART4 for the actual digital display, and that's good. That's working. But we do want to have the OSD coming through. We did do the CLI. What you want to type in here is set OSD underscore, and it gives you everything here, which is really good. So let's see, display port device right here. That's what I would want to select, and then equal, and then here it is. It gives you, well, it has auto, but you want to have MSP. So we'll do that. Enter, SAVE. So that's saved. Now, I'm getting these commands here, by the way, from the HDZero website. I'll show you here right now. Here it is. Same thing I'm typing in right now. Set OSD display port device equals MSP. You saw me just do that right now. And the second one I'm going to do right here is to get it from which UART. So I have my VTX connected. In my case, it is connected to UART4, and that's based upon what Beta FPV showed. And this one here, you see RX4 and TX4, so this is UART4. Copy and paste this in here, and then use your UART number -1. So I'm gonna type this in here, and then use equal 3, because we're using UART4, -1 will equal 3. Set display port MSP serial, so I can click that. So here we go, 3, enter, and then save. All right, and we should be good. So technically now, if I power on my goggles and I power on my VTX, technically I should have OSD in my goggles here. All right, there we go. Link quality, everything is on my screen now, which is really what you want. Now that's the long and hard way. If you don't have the most current configurator, or you have an older beta flight on your flight controller, then that's the way you'd have to do it. And that's true for, that's good to know in case you wanna set up, you know, your OSD or set up your VTX for any drone. That's the way you would wanna configure your VTX. Now, if you have a new one here, we have these presets right here, and this is the easier way of doing it. So you go on here and you just go to your presets, and let's see if you find it. It should be a, so here it is, HDZero VTX. So if you don't know any of those commands, you can just come right here, click on this, and it works for all the VTX. VTX gives you a VTX table, HDZero, smart audio if you have smart audio. This whoop VTX does not have smart audio, so it doesn't really matter. Click on that, and as you can see, it gives you some options right here. Click on here. So we're using all VTX right here. We're gonna use display port on UART3 or 4 or 5. In this case, we are using UART4. And by selecting these right here, it's gonna generate a CLI automatically and then save it to the flight controller. let's just do it. It's not gonna change right now because it's already configured, but let's just do it this way. Pick, agree, save and reboot. Plug it in one more time. There we go. All right, we have an image and we have the OSD, which is great. All right, this all looks great, guys.